as a leader, we we're heading into a leadership crisis if we rely only on the tools and methodologies and frameworks that have worked in the past. We have to recognize that the future is 100% uncertain. And we need to be able to show up with that adaptive intelligence to be able to react to whatever happens in front of us and admit and recognize that what we don't know is so much more important to focus on than what we do already know.
Hello and welcome back to this week's episode of The High Performance Leader. I'm really excited this week to be joined by a fellow high performance leadership nerd, Andrew Barry. I say nerd with a lot of love because as those of you who listen to the podcast regularly will know that nerding out on various topics is my favorite thing to do. Andrew is pretty auspicious in the world of learning and development. He served in executive roles at global organizations like KPMG, and he's now the founder and CEO of Curious Lion. They're a company that specialize in high-performance leadership development. He and his team have developed thousands of leaders in incredible clients like PagerDuty, Pinterest, IMG, and Alight. And they've won numerous awards for their engaging learning experience. Andrew is also a fellow podcaster, so make sure you tune in to the Learning Culture podcast, where you can pick up some insights and trends in the industry. I know I'll be subscribing to that one as soon as I get off this podcast. Andrew, welcome to the show. It's really great to have you with us.
Jimmy, thank you so much for that warm welcome. I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Excellent. And Andrew, tell us a little bit about where you're based and how, and a little bit of your backstory. How did you get to here?
Yeah, long route from the tip of Africa. Grew up in South Africa, in Cape Town primarily. Then at KPMG, you mentioned earlier, was kind of my route to the States. So I moved here like 12, 13 years ago. I was with KPMG for about 12, 13 years in total. And 7 years ago, I plucked up the courage to leave the comforts of a massive organization like that and start Curious Lion. So it's been quite a journey since that, and based here in New York and now just in the suburbs just outside in New Jersey.
Fantastic. Such an interesting journey. And I see so many similarities in the work that we do and the types of people that we engage with. But one of the things that we discussed in our first meeting was just how VUCA, the world has become for leaders to operate. For those of you who don't know what VUCA is, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And we really see that level of uncertainty in the commercial marketplace now as a challenge for leaders, right? So can you give us a little bit of a deeper dive into what are some of those uncertainty challenges that you notice and you experience when talking to your clients and your leaders?
Yeah, absolutely, Jimmy. The way I think of the uncertainty, and it's great that you want to like zero in on that part of VUCA. I mean, all of it is really a great example of the accelerating nature of that volatility and uncertainty and change that everyone's experiencing. But really, what we're talking about here, what we focus on a lot in our work, is equipping leaders to deal with low data environments, because that is the nature of things right now. And unfortunately, I think most of the leadership training and development that's out there, and I know your work is an exception to this as well, but very few are, right? There's a lot of legacy thinking in our industry, and it's all based on teaching people methodologies and frameworks and mental models for things that worked in the past, and it's not about equipping them for what they're going to have to do to achieve success now, right? And so much of that, like one of the ways I think about this a lot is that the work we're talking about here, leadership, right, it's a thinking sport, right? It's all about cognition. And so our work focuses very much on how do we develop elite cognition in leaders, focusing on things like decision making and problem solving and storytelling and collaboration and building trust, these kind of things, which are all like, I don't know, a big part of your work as well, right? Like that's that's the sport, right? That's the game everyone's playing. And I don't think enough training out there right now addresses this. And that's why I think it's a leadership crisis, because I think a lot of companies are relying on that legacy
I'm
thinking.
so aligned. And one of the pieces of research that we love to lean into is Josh Bersin's power skills. And I think, in the old days they were called the soft skills, but it's ironic that
Yeah.
the soft skills are actually much harder to learn than the technical skills, which were perceived as hard skills. And I think, that as you say, that ability to feel and work my way through challenges when we don't have enough data, to think myself through the problem, but also to involve others, to create an environment where people can still work, is a real challenge. Can you give us some examples of some practical tips or strategies that leaders could use that's going to help them navigate some of these low data environments?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with recognizing that there is no perfect plan, right? There's no perfect answer. And so much time is wasted trying to come up with that perfect plan instead of getting good at planning, right? Like there's a very big difference between those two things, and I think it often starts there because what's going to define your success is not what you've pre-planned or what you've documented you're going to do. It's what you actually do when the moment presents itself, right? And so, and again, like I think a lot of the existing training out there just teaches people these existing ways of doing things, and then they get really good at memorizing those approaches, but they've got no way to apply them. So yeah, I mean, to get practical here, one of the things I think let's talk about problem solving, right? Like that is a huge part of this. For us, we focus a lot on that skill specifically because to me, problem solving is creativity, right? Like creativity is that ability to solve complex, open-ended problems, and to be able to do that over and over again, depending on because these problems pop up all the time. So we can go into like a few specific techniques around developing creativity, and I want to see if you're open for this. I'm happy to kind of run a few of these on you if you want to kind of test these out. We can just do like a live. We didn't talk about this beforehand. We can do like a live little experiment here to see if it lands.
I'm 100% game. Let's give it a go.
Okay. All right. So this first one is a technique that I learned from a professor at Ohio State. His name is Dr. Angus Fletcher, an absolute pioneer in the field of narrative thinking for creativity. And it informs a lot of our work. And so this first exercise, just to show you kind of the example, the difference between logical and narrative thinking. And for the listeners, once you understand that difference, it opens up a whole world of possibilities for you. So, Jimmy, I'm going to ask you to think of someone. Don't tell me who it is, but think of someone close to you and just get that person in your mind. Okay.
I have them.
Okay. Now, I want you to think of three statements that describe them. So, this person is, and then, like label, that thing. So, think of three descriptors for them.
Determined, artistic, and passionate.
Okay. Determined, artistic, and passionate. Now, I want you to pick one of those, right? And I want you to think of a specific story or thing that happened in the past, something that helps you know that they are, determined, artistic, and I forget what the third one was. Just pick one of those and think of like a specific incident or event.
Okay, got one.
Okay. So which of those three did you pick?
I determined.
Determined. Okay. And what's the story?
So this person was moved to a new city and was in the process of setting up a business with very little seed capital during the first couple of months of 2020. And then that business was entirely dependent on people coming to the city and being essentially hosted guests while they were here. And of course, we all know what happened in 2020. And this person pivoted for the rest of 2020 and did something else to make sure that they survived. But also, they continued to build the machine in the background of this business, which is now really flourishing and doing a fantastic job. And I guess for me, it was the ability to survive on little to no income for a very long period of time, with the vision and the confirmed certainty that that it would come right in the end, and the determination to keep going.
That's beautiful. And I'm going to come back to that specific story, but now, and hopefully people who are listening did this exercise. How can you think now how you feel differently? Like your experience of that person, your understanding of that person feels different when you said they are determined, and when you told me that story. Can you articulate
Yeah,
that?
I mean, this is a beautiful example. I love this exercise, because you suddenly start to unlock the color and the emotion in that are connected between you and that person. It goes to a lot of the work we do around connection, and it's around finding that place where you can both exist together in an energetic frequency. And for me, that was a really aligning experience to be able to share how that person and I have become much more aligned on an energetic frequency. So it was
That's
connecting, it was emotive, and it was colorful.
Yeah, this is awesome. Just for everybody listening, like we didn't plan this. Jimmy had no idea I was going to ask that question, and I had no idea how you were going to respond to it. And that's exactly the response we get all the time. And I love that you said energetic frequency, which is a way that you obviously think about these things. But to me, it's so descriptive of what we're talking about here. What the difference is, it's attunement. You've got this like deeper sense of connection to that person, and now that means much more deeply in your bones what to do next, right? What action to take, whether that's just to reach out to say, hey, I was thinking about you, or like maybe it's spurred some sort of idea about them, whatever. But you never would have got that from saying, oh, so and so is determined, right? So yeah. I think there's a lot for people to take away from that. And the thing I've learned from Angus and and his wife Sarah is that that contrast is so important, right? Logical thinking has a place, right? It's really great for labeling, for categorizing, for analysis, that kind of stuff. But if you really want to convey meaning, right, and talking about this energetic frequency and all that sort of stuff, you need story, you need narrative, right? And we don't spend enough time doing that in the work environment, right? Think about like after action reviews, right? Or postmortems or debriefs on projects, right? These typically are such pro forma activities, right? You show up in the room, you quickly go through like what happened, what did we expect to happen, what happened, like what was the gap there, and what are we going to do differently, right? And everyone wants to skip ahead to the what are we going to do differently part, come up with a bunch of labels, right? Oh, we're going to, right? And you just like get as many of those, and then you feel great, right? We got a list of 8 things here. This is awesome, right? And then what happens? Like nothing, right? Like nothing actually
Goes on a
tangible.
shelf with all the other lessons learned that we don't pay attention to normally.
Exactly, right? Exactly. And what Angus and his wife again, or actually I think Angus and his work with the military have shown with their after action reviews, is that when you spend up to 75% of the time in those meetings unpacking the narrative, like so step 2, what actually happened, you get to the what we're going to do differently part anyway, but you get it in a much more implicitly felt way, and that leads to action, and that's the key. That's another characteristic of narrative thinking as well. It's action oriented. It's very, so yeah. So that's one little example for people to kind of just open up some of the possibilities on that. We can go into one more as well if you want, or feel free to take this wherever you want to go.
I'm loving the energy we've created, and you sparked so many places we could go with this. I think one of the things you said though is around the military lens, and certainly my experience with both conventional and special military forces has been the difference between what I would call conventional military, who I would liken to medium performing teams, and special forces, who I would liken to high performing teams, is around that idea of really honest accountability, unpacking things in lessons learned, in debrief and after action reviews, with a view to not creating a blame circumstance, but actually creating a
Yeah,
learning culture. And
yeah,
there is everybody can call out, I saw you step here and maybe you should have stepped there. And we all learn from that. And equally, I think businesses don't have that opportunity. A lot of people don't have that skill, or they don't have the trust between the individuals within teams to allow those debriefs to take place. And we
Mhm.
work, I know you do as well, in building that connection and trust between people, just like we did there with the story, because it's once you've got that connection and trust, you can start to really turn up the performance lens with great skill. The other thing I heard that you were mentioning was maybe the old school tactics and techniques that we're using for new modern day problems. And I was thinking of the Cynefin framework, specifically the fact that a lot of our leadership development is really aligned to the right hand side of the model, which is our simple and complicated environments. And the challenges of today are more complex and chaotic. And I want to go into that chaotic space again for a moment, because leaders essentially are being faced with those extremely complex or chaotic contexts more and more frequently. Hey, Jimmy here. Just wanted to drop into this episode and let you know that we're so grateful for all of those reviews that you as listeners leave on our podcast. We put our hearts and souls into the podcast, and the guests we invite are absolutely fantastic. I wanted to share one review with you from a recent episode from Kelly. Jimmy's experience and thoughtful dialogue provide a phenomenal canvas of learning opportunities from thought leaders in the industry. It was a pleasure both listening and participating. What a great resource to learn valuable tips and tricks to navigating impactful leadership capabilities. So not only are we thrilled to have incredible guests on the show, but we're also absolutely overjoyed that it's having a positive impact on our listeners like you on the Ways of Working podcast. Speak soon. What have you seen in terms of the skill gaps and the things that leaders might be missing to deal with those new complex and chaotic contexts?
So the first thing that comes to mind is you mentioned this thing about the blame culture. So this idea of, I think the skill gap is probably like a radical accountability, like taking charge and taking responsibility for the issue or the challenge. I think a lot of that stems from the fact that most of the people that we're talking about here, right, these high performance leaders are A-type people that have really never experienced failure before, like we're probably like top of their class from, middle school through high school through university, in the top of sports teams and, artistic achievements. There's no like that experience with failure of like being okay with it and seeing it as a learning curve is something that doesn't come naturally to people, and to me, that is the learned skill, like really understanding that at some point you're going to hit where the stakes are so high, right? You've worked so high up in your career that you will meet a point that you cannot face and, face successfully the first time you face it, right? Because it's going to be so new and so complex and so uncertain, and you're going to fail, right? And I think that's a crucible moment for a lot of people. And Warren Bennis, pretty familiar with like his leadership. He's like kind of the godfather of leadership. He talks about crucible moments a lot. Like those are the moments where we learn and we really step into our real ability as a leader, And so many of us shy away from those moments and try and avoid them at all costs, right? And that's where blame comes in. Like, no, that wasn't me. So now you not only have you failed, but you've now missed the opportunity to learn, And so that's such a big point. I think for me, like kind of starting point for all of this, if you can make that shift in your mind, it opens up for a whole lot of other skills we could talk about.
So true that we play it safe, don't we? Because we don't want to fail, because the blame culture in the organization or the organizational appetite is we must succeed at all costs. And actually what we do is we must play it safe at all costs. And somebody likened it to me to playing a game of soccer where you're just playing not to lose versus
Yeah.
trying to win. And there's a massive difference in the energy, the focus, the innovation and the curiosity that you apply when you're just trying not to lose. And those organizations, I think, that really stand out are the ones that play to win or even change the game versus just playing not to lose the game. So we talked about these gaps that come up, and you talked about a gap of radical accountability. You talked about a gap of playing it safe or not being experimental and brave enough. If I am in an organization that is full of these A-type leaders, and we're all, playing our game and playing politics, and it's a complex environment, and we have a complex business, but we think we're doing a great job. How do you go through the process of helping that business to self-identify or
Yeah.
identify where there may be some gaps and opportunities in the way they're performing to help them become a high performing business, especially when they
Yeah.
don't necessarily have that awareness of the problem?
Yeah, this is why our podcast is called the Learning Culture Podcast. That's kind of what we're talking about here, right? Is this culture of learning, and practically what we did is we built a diagnostic tool to measure this, right? So we've identified 40 sort of vectors to measure this. It's broken out into categories like organizational design, the team learning aspect, the individual mastery. One of them, there are 8 of them in total, but the one that's the most important out of all of them is leadership, right? So the sort of tone at the top, is the common way to talk about this. That is by far the most important determining factor here. And so it starts there, and it starts with those leaders demonstrating like vulnerability, empathy, these qualities which can be developed. This is not, this is, I think this is another blind spot that many people have, is that you're either born with empathy or not. So and curiosity you mentioned earlier, like these things like this, you can actually develop these, and it starts with awareness, right? It starts with like an awareness of, do I have this? And so much of our work starts with self-awareness, right? For leaders, like where like an honest account of where I am right now, and then a projection of where I want to be, right? I want to show up for my team. I want to bring the best out of them and help them reach their potential, right? So then, okay, great. But what's that gap now? What's that skill gap that you've got? And yes, empathy is a skill. We can get better at this, and we can develop this, right? And we can set that pathway out to do that. So yeah, so I would say like the diagnostic has helped a lot, and it's a lot of these factors around just the organizational's approach to failure, to collaboration, to supporting people on the team, mentoring, coaching. I mean, there are a lot of aspects to it, but leadership's the most important one.
And it's fascinating to me. And I'm smiling for those of you who are listening. I'm smiling on screen because a lot of what Andrew's saying is so aligned with the
Yeah.
way we think, which is that great leadership isn't the fact that you're a great salesperson or a great finance person or a great engineer or whatever it is. Great leadership is all about the people skills and the soft skills or the power skills that you have, and your ability to adapt and learn to your new environments and solve those unencountered problems so they don't become your crucible moment. So you continually have that learning appetite. And I think that's where we're kind of heading here. One of the things that really resonates for me here also is, once we've identified the gap in knowledge, once we've come across the opportunity for learning and growth, it isn't
Mm.
just about going on a course, is it? It's not. We can't fix
Mm-hmm.
this with a 1-day workshop or something like that.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So this is one of my favorite talking points, been kind of bleating on a bit about for a long time. And that's that it's another kind of misconception that a lot of companies have, is that training is this event that we send people to, right? And even more pernicious is the fact that people see it as an event that takes you out of work, right? So it's like, oh, I've got to go and attend training now, and do we have time to like check our emails? They just the thought of it, these separate things, and that's not how learning works, right? Like you don't learn as an event. Learning is a process. It's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing process that never ends. Like this whole thing we're talking about of seeing failure as an opportunity to learn starts from. And again, I'd encourage anybody who's listening to this, who's feeling stuck in their careers, to honestly evaluate, like, which do you think is more important in your life? The stuff you know now, or everything else you don't know, right? And it's the latter. If you really think about this, that's more important here. It's what you don't know, and that's as soon as you kind of wrap your head around that, that changes the game, because now learning is a process. Now I'm always learning, right? And then I start to recognize I can integrate working and learning. So everything I do is an opportunity to learn. And then that's the individual path. Then start to do that in a team, right? So be intentional about reflecting. Now start sharing that with people. And this is a great tip for anybody listening, again, if you're feeling stuck or something like that, is start to share your learnings with people. And yeah, a lot of people like this shows up a lot in. I'm quite active on LinkedIn, and a lot of people don't, like don't want to do that. Like, how do you do this? Like, I wouldn't know what to post or whatever. And I mean, I just mainly just post like stuff that I'm learning, things that I'm realizing for myself, and it resonates. Like people want to read that sort of stuff. I love reading other people's posts about stuff they're learning because that's real, and so that's kind of where it starts for me. It's like take that mindset of what I don't know is more important than what I know. See everything as a learning opportunity, and then start sharing that. Because what you'll see happens is you'll be like a magnet. You'll start to attract other people who are maybe on that same journey and learning with you. Now you've got someone to support you in that. Maybe they are behind you in the journey and they are learning from you. And now they start to show you things that you don't even realize. Like, oh well, I actually know more than a lot of people on this topic. And so that's a really cool feeling. And you'll find mentors as well who are ahead of you, who say, you know what, I'm gonna yeah, this worked for me. I did this before, and this reminds me of when I was, 2 years ago, whatever. So it's an incredibly freeing process. And I'm not saying just do it on LinkedIn at all. I'm saying on your team. Start sharing this in your team. And a practical way to do that, we started doing this at Curious Line, is have a weekly office hours. And I used to go to those every single week and lead them every single week. And I'll do it monthly, but the team continues to do it on a weekly basis. And that's the agenda. It's just we talk about and share what we're learning and how we're applying it in our work.
It's so beautiful, that idea of a continuous learning culture. I think back to if I think back 10, 15 years when I was working in L&D, and one of the things I used to say to people was, you actually have two jobs. The first job is to do your job, and the second job is to work out how to do your job better. And as time has gone on, I've actually changed that now. And so your first job is still to do your job really well. But actually, your second job is to learn new ways to positively impact your environment and the job you do in that environment. Because it's starting to think much more collectively and about those people that are around me. So how can I learn to positively impact the environment and the way I do my job in that environment? And it goes back to a really fascinating conversation I had with, I guess, one of your future previous rivals, who was working at Deloitte. And she said that it was about doing my best 40 hours, not just my fixed 40 hours. So that was about, how do I positively impact my environment? How do I make sure I'm turning up for the best opportunities and the best meetings in the best way, and also learning to be able to contribute to those meetings really effectively and be at my best. And I thought that was a really beautiful articulation. How do I do my best 40 each week? By learning and growing and developing. Because you're so right, if you lean on the old skills, how are you growing? And it's like standing on a riverbank watching a fast flowing river. Your skills are good for now, but the river's always going to be flowing ahead of you, and you're never going to be catching up. You're going to be left behind, even if you're standing still and you don't want to go any further in your career. You've still got to be in the river paddling to keep up.
Yeah, it's a beautiful analogy as well, because the river's always changing, right? Like you can walk into it and it's never the same river. And that's true for life and work and everything, right? It's never the same. And so why prepare for something tomorrow as if it was going to be the same as yesterday? And that's effectively what we're doing, like by relying on these old tactics.
We're still training, many organizations are still training leaders to be ready for a 1990s, early 2000s business environment. Using the GE mindset,
exactly.
and competencies and Korn Ferry, and no disrespect to any of those organizations, but the world has moved on, and we have a more complex environment that we need to manage. Absolutely. You mentioned your podcast. Please tell us a little bit more about it and the purpose of the podcast, and who is the ideal listener.
Yeah, it's the purpose of the podcast is to talk to people about how they are building cultures of learning in their workplace. So it's really for anyone who wants to understand how to create that mindset of continuous improvement, growth, of connection, of all of that kind of thing as a leader, right? Like how to show up as a leader to promote that kind of culture. So it's a lot of fun getting to talk to people and see, like I'm sure you do, right? Like you see how it shows up in so many different workplaces, these kind of things we're talking about. And I mean, I learn so much every single time about the nuances of it. Because like one thing we should caveat for people is none of this we're talking about is easy, right? It's not, otherwise we'd all be doing this, right? This idea of like accepting blame, taking responsibility, like seeing failure as a learning opportunity, that's hard. That's really, really hard stuff to do. And so it's really cool to hear people who, are making that work in complicated workplaces.
Absolutely. And really nice caveat. None of this is easy. It's simple stuff and it's
Exactly.
fairly obvious stuff. And if you put
Yeah.
a group of smart people in a room and you talk about it, they'll all come up with the right answers. But it's that moving from knowing it to actually doing it and
Yeah.
executing it and being consistent when you're stressed and worried about it. That's where people like you and I think, add value as facilitators and helping that conversation to flow a little bit more effectively. And the podcast is another avenue or way of sharing that message.
Yeah.
You also mentioned in our earlier on the call, and I'd love to be able to share this with our listeners, that you actually have a course that they can grab and go through, which is going to help them also in this journey, right?
Yeah, exactly. And thanks for bringing that back up. So I don't think I actually mentioned this during our conversation, but the way we label all of this, I guess, internally is adaptive intelligence, like that's what we're talking about here. And by the way, you mentioned an example earlier on where you said is this person that you had in mind and their determination, and you said the ability to survive. That was it was one of the phrases that is, to me, like that's the core of adaptive intelligence. It is a truly primal intelligence that we are hardwired, and have evolved, that ability. And so, yeah, adaptive intelligence is that. It's like kind of getting back to our roots and saying, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Right. And so I'm not going to try and over prepare for it. Well, I mean, I'm going to prepare for it. That's not true. But I'm not going to create a plan and then stick to that plan. I'm going to be able to adapt on the spot. So that's adaptive intelligence. And yeah, we've got a free email course on that where, the team and I have put together, kind of trying to break it down for people. Like, what are we actually talking about here? We identify some of the enemies, blame culture and these kind of things. And then we sort of break down what we mean by adaptive intelligence and give some of those tips, like that exercise that we ran earlier. So folks can try this out. And yeah, they can go check that out. We've got it at curiouslinelearning.com/flip for flipping the
Amazing.
script. Yeah.
And we will put the link to that course below this episode in the show notes. So please make sure you check out that course. I know I will be. Andrew, this has been such an interesting conversation. If I was to ask you to give a key takeaway or a nutshell thought that encompasses everything we've spoken about today, what would that be?
Yeah, I think when people leaving this conversation to really think about the fact that as a leader, we're heading into a leadership crisis if we rely only on the tools and methodologies and frameworks that have worked in the past. We have to recognize that the future is 100% uncertain, and we need to be able to show up with that adaptive intelligence to be able to react to whatever happens in front of us, and admit and recognize that what we don't know is so much more important to focus on than what we do already know.
Andrew Barry, CEO and founder of Curious Lion Learning. It's been fascinating to talk with you and to learn a whole lot more about what the work you're doing with clients, and to see so many synergies with the way we think around leadership development and some of the opportunity areas for organizations. Really appreciate you making the time for us, and thank you so much for the wisdom and some of the resources that you shared. I know that it'll be super useful to our guests.
Yeah, Jimmy, thanks for the opportunity to come and talk to your audience. And I love talking to you about this because you get it and you're passionate about it. And yeah, I could keep doing this. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks very much.